My fiancée took me to a luxury restaurant to meet her mother. While they stepped away, a cleaning lady slipped me a note. Hide in the storage room, now. No time to explain. Just trust me. I did, and minutes later I understood everything. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Kevin Holloway had learned to trust his instincts the hard way, not through dramatic failures or spectacular mistakes, but through the slow accumulation of small betrayals that most people dismissed as bad luck. At 37, he carried himself with the careful posture of someone who had been knocked down once and refused to let it happen again. The divorce had done that to him. Not the anger or the tears. Those had faded within the first year. What remained was something more valuable, a kind of wariness that made him pause before signing anything, before believing anyone, before letting his guard slip, even slightly. He worked in logistics for a mid-sized distribution company headquartered 2 towns over from Merrill Lake, Wisconsin. The job wasn't glamorous. He managed shipping routes, negotiated with carriers, solved problems that most people never thought about. The work paid well enough to own a modest house outright, drive a reliable truck, and keep a healthy savings account that he pretended didn't exist. Kevin didn't flash money because he'd seen what it attracted. He didn't chase status because he understood how hollow it was. He simply lived quietly and carefully in a way that kept him safe from the chaos that seemed to follow other people. That's what made him perfect. That's what Jean Pierce had recognized the moment she saw his banking history. Kevin first met Jean on a Tuesday morning in March, when the snow had finally melted, but the air still carried that bitter edge of winter refusing to let go. He'd walked into the regional bank branch to handle some paperwork for a business account, something routine that shouldn't have taken more than 20 minutes. Jean was behind the counter, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing a charcoal blazer that looked professional without being severe. When she smiled at him, it reached her eyes in that specific way that made people feel noticed. "You're Kevin Holloway, right?" she said, glancing at her computer screen. "You've been with us for almost 8 years now." "That sound about right," Kevin said, surprised she'd bothered to check. "I just want to make sure I'm taking care of our long-term customers," Jean said, her voice carrying a warmth that felt genuine. "Most people just see account numbers. I try to see people." It was a good line. Kevin recognized it as a sales technique, but he appreciated the effort. She processed his paperwork efficiently, asked a few friendly questions about whether he was satisfied with her services, and sent him on his way with a business card that had her direct extension written on the back in neat handwriting. "If you ever need anything," she said, "don't hesitate." Kevin pocketed the card and forgot about it, until 2 weeks later, when his sister called with the news about the cancer. The diagnosis hit like a physical force: stage 3 breast cancer, aggressive, requiring immediate treatment. Kevin spent the next few days navigating insurance paperwork, researching treatment centers, and trying to be the strong older brother his sister needed, while his own fear threatened to crack his composure. He was at the bank handling a transfer to help with medical expenses when Jean noticed his expression. "Everything okay?" she asked quietly, stepping away from the counter to speak with him privately. Kevin hesitated. He didn't share personal problems with strangers. But something in her tone, concern without prying, warmth without pressure, made him explain briefly about his sister's situation. Jean listened without interrupting. When he finished, she didn't offer empty platitudes or false reassurances. "My aunt went through something similar," she said. "If you need help figuring out the medical billing or finding resources, I know some people who might be able to help." She wrote down a name and number for a patient advocate at the regional hospital. It turned out to be legitimately useful. Kevin thanked her and left, surprised by the gesture. 3 days later, Jean sent him a text, just checking in, seeing how his sister was doing. Not pushy, not trying to sell him anything, just present. Kevin found himself texting back. Over the following months, their exchanges grew more frequent. Jean would ask about his sister's treatment, and Kevin would share small updates. She remembered details: which doctor they'd chosen, what day the chemotherapy sessions were scheduled, how his sister's daughter was handling everything. Kevin noticed these things because he'd trained himself to notice patterns. But Jean's interest felt different from the usual networking pleasantries people offered. She never asked for anything in return. She just listened, responded thoughtfully, and occasionally shared her own struggles, caring for an aging mother, dealing with the stress of banking regulations, navigating life in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. In May, when his sister's prognosis improved dramatically after the second round of treatment, Jean was the first person outside his immediate family that Kevin wanted to tell. They met for coffee on a Saturday afternoon. Not a date. Just two people who'd become something like friends, sitting in a quiet corner booth while rain drummed against the windows. "I'm really glad she's doing better," Jean said, and the relief in her voice sounded real. They talked for 3 hours, about nothing important and everything that mattered. Kevin found himself laughing more than he had in months, sharing stories about his father who'd died 5 years earlier, talking about the logistics work he did with an enthusiasm that surprised him. Jean talked about her childhood in Wisconsin, how she'd always wanted to travel but never quite managed to leave, how her mother had sacrificed so much to raise her alone after her father died, how she sometimes felt trapped in a life that was comfortable but not quite fulfilling. "I think that's what I like about you," Jean said eventually, her fingers wrapped around a cooling cup of tea. "You don't pretend to have it all figured out. You're just honest." Kevin felt something shift in his chest. Not the wild rush of new attraction, but something steadier. Something that felt like it might last. "Would you want to do this again?" he asked. "Maybe dinner next time?" Jean's smile was answer enough. They dated slowly, which suited Kevin perfectly. Jean never rushed him, never pushed for definitions or commitments. They saw each other once or twice a week. Dinner at quiet restaurants, walks along the lake, evenings watching movies at his house while rain tapped against the roof. She was careful with her affection, offering it in measured doses that never felt overwhelming. A hand on his arm when she laughed at his jokes. A kiss goodnight that lasted just long enough to promise more without demanding it. The kind of gradual intimacy that made Kevin feel safe. By September, when the leaves started turning and the air carried that first hint of approaching winter, Jean stayed over for the first time. They moved together with the careful consideration of people who'd been alone long enough to know what they wanted. Afterward, lying in the darkness with her head on his chest, Jean said something that lodged itself deep in Kevin's mind. "I think you're the safest man I've ever known." Kevin believed her. He believed her because he'd spent 6 months watching her prove it through actions, not words. She'd never asked him for money, never pressured him about the future, never tried to change who he was or push him faster than he wanted to go. Jean Pierce felt like the antidote to every mistake he'd made in his first marriage. Where his ex-wife had been demanding and volatile, Jean was patient and stable. Where his ex had spent money like it was meaningless, Jean was careful and practical. Kevin started thinking about what came next, not rushing toward it, but allowing himself to imagine a future that included her. That was exactly what Jean had been waiting for. In November, Jean brought up meeting her mother. They were at his house, cooking dinner together in his small kitchen while snow began falling outside. "I've been thinking," Jean said, stirring pasta sauce on the stove. "You know how important family is to me." "I do," Kevin said, chopping vegetables for a salad. "My mother keeps asking about you," Jean continued. Her tone was casual, but Kevin caught the careful way she watched for his reaction. "She's protective. After my dad died, it's just been the two of us. She wants to make sure I'm with someone solid." Kevin understood that logic. His own father had been the same way before he died, cautious about anyone new in his children's lives, wanting to be sure they were being treated right. "I'd like to meet her," Kevin said. Jean's relief was visible. "Really? You don't mind?" "Why would I mind? Some men get weird about meeting the mother," Jean said. "Like it's this huge pressure." Kevin shrugged. "If she matters to you, then meeting her matters." Jean kissed him then, with an intensity that surprised him. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright. "You're different," she whispered. "You're really different." Kevin smiled, pleased by her reaction. He should have been terrified. They met Nadine Pierce on a Saturday evening at a restaurant called the Birchwood, 20 minutes outside Merrill Lake. The place occupied that specific niche of upscale dining that small-town Wisconsin did well. White tablecloths and actual wine glasses, but servers who knew half the customers by name. Jean had insisted on meeting there rather than at her mother's house. She wants to make a good impression, Jean had explained. She's nervous about this. Kevin had worn his best shirt, a dark blue button-down that his sister said made him look responsible, and arrived 15 minutes early. Jean was already there, sitting alone in the waiting area, wearing a dress he hadn't seen before. "Mom's running a few minutes late," she said, standing to kiss him. "Traffic? No problem," Kevin said, though he noticed Jean checking her phone every 30 seconds. Nadine arrived exactly 10 minutes late. Not so late as to be rude, but late enough to make an entrance. She was smaller than Kevin expected, maybe 5'4" in her heels, with steel gray hair, cut short and sharp. She wore a cream-colored blazer and dark slacks that looked expensive without being ostentatious. Her makeup was perfect, her jewelry minimal but real. The moment she saw Kevin, her face transformed into a smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "You must be Kevin," she said, pulling him into a hug before he could offer his hand. "I've heard so much about you." The hug lasted just a beat too long, her hands on his shoulders with a grip that felt possessive. When she pulled back, she studied his face with an intensity that made Kevin want to straighten his posture. "You remind me of my late husband," Nadine said, her voice carrying genuine warmth. He had that same steadiness about him, a provider, a man who doesn't run when things get hard. Kevin felt a strange flush of pride at the comparison. He'd never met Jean's father, but Jean had spoken about him with obvious love. A man who'd worked construction for 30 years, who'd saved carefully and planned wisely, who'd made sure his family was taken care of before he died, too young from a heart attack at 52. To be compared to that kind of man felt like an honor. That reaction should have sent up every red flag Kevin had learned to watch for. Instead, he just smiled and said, "Thank you. That means a lot." Dinner passed smoothly. Too smoothly, Kevin would realize later. Nadine asked thoughtful questions about his work, his family, his plans. She listened with the kind of focused attention that made you feel like the most interesting person in the room. When Kevin talked about his sister's cancer recovery, Nadine reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "That must have been terrifying," she said. "But you showed up for her. That's what family does." Jean smiled at him from across the table, her expression proud and warm. The conversation flowed naturally between the three of them. Nadine shared stories about raising Jean alone, about the sacrifices she'd made to ensure her daughter had opportunities. Jean added details that made her mother laugh. Childhood memories, inside jokes, the comfortable shorthand of two people who knew each other completely. Kevin found himself relaxing into the evening, enjoying the way Jean's hand found his under the table, the way Nadine treated him like he was already part of the family. They ordered dessert. Nadine insisted on paying, waving away Kevin's protests with a firm shake of her head. "You'll have plenty of opportunities to treat us," she said with a wink. "Tonight's on me." As they waited for coffee, Nadine leaned back in her chair and studied Kevin with that same intense gaze from earlier. "Can I be honest with you, Kevin?" she asked. "Of course." "Jean's been hurt before," Nadine said, her voice dropping into something more serious. "She doesn't talk about it much, but I'm her mother. I see things. She's dated men who said all the right words, but couldn't follow through. Men who talked about commitment, but ran at the first sign of difficulty." Kevin nodded, understanding the warning beneath the words. "You seem different," Nadine continued. "You seem like the kind of man who finishes what he starts. Am I right about that?" The question hung in the air, weighted with implications. Kevin met her gaze directly. "I don't make promises I can't keep, and I don't walk away from people I care about." Nadine's smile could have melted ice. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say." Kevin excused himself to take a phone call, his sister checking in about some medication questions. He stepped into the hallway near the restrooms, talking quietly while guests moved past him toward the dining room. When he ended the call, he noticed a woman in a server's uniform standing nearby, pretending to adjust a menu board. She was older, maybe in her 50s, with tired eyes and nervous hands. As Kevin moved to return to the table, she shifted closer. "Drop something," she whispered. What? Pretend you dropped something, she hissed urgently. Get down. Now. Kevin's instincts, honed by years of careful living, told him to listen. He let his phone slip from his hand, crouching to pick it up. The woman dropped a folded piece of paper beside it. Storage room. Left hallway. 5 minutes, she whispered, then walked away quickly, disappearing into the kitchen before Kevin could respond. He picked up his phone and the paper, palming it smoothly as he stood. His heart rate had kicked up, adrenaline sharpening his senses. In the bathroom, he locked himself in a stall and unfolded what turned out to be a receipt with handwriting scrawled on the back. The letters were rushed but clear. They've done this before. Do not sign anything tonight. Storage room. Left hallway. Trust me. Kevin stared at the words, his mind racing through possibilities. A prank. A mistake. A warning from someone unstable. Or the truth. He thought about Nadine's hug, just slightly too familiar. Jean's perfect patience over 6 months. The way this dinner had felt rehearsed, like lines delivered by actors who'd performed them before. Kevin didn't panic. Panic clouded judgment, made you react instead of respond. His father had taught him that during the divorce, when his ex-wife's lawyer had tried to overwhelm him with paperwork and deadlines and emotional manipulation. When someone rushes love, slow everything down, his father had said. When something feels too perfect, look for the seams. Kevin flushed the toilet for sound, washed his hands methodically, and returned to the table wearing a smile. Everything okay? Jean asked, concern touching her features. All good, Kevin said. Just some questions about medication timing. He made it through another 15 minutes of pleasant conversation, laughing at Nadine's jokes, agreeing with Jean's observations about local politics. But his awareness had sharpened to a razor's edge, catching details he'd missed before. The way Nadine's eyes tracked his reactions to certain topics. How Jean's hand on his arm always seemed to come at moments when he might pull away from something forward. The subtle glances between mother and daughter. Communication flowing beneath the surface conversation. I need to use the restroom, Kevin said eventually, standing. Be right back. Take your time, Nadine said warmly. We're not going anywhere. The phrase felt loaded with meaning Kevin didn't want to examine yet. He found a storage room easily. It was tucked at the end of a narrow hallway marked staff only, the door slightly ajar. Kevin glanced back toward the dining room, saw no one watching, and slipped inside. The room was small, crowded with supplies, boxes of napkins, cleaning products, extra linen stacked on metal shelving. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, casting harsh shadows. The server woman was there, her back against the far wall, arms crossed defensively. You came, she said, sounding surprised. You said to trust you, Kevin replied quietly. I'm here. Start talking. She studied his face for a long moment, seeming to measure something. Then she nodded, like she'd made a decision. My name's Donna Reese. I used to date a man named Thomas Garrett. We were together for 2 years. Good years. I thought we were going to get married. Kevin waited, his pulse steady but his attention absolute. Then he met Jean Pierce. Donna continued, her voice bitter. At that same bank branch where she works now. Started dating her. Within 6 months, he was talking about marriage. His whole personality changed. He got secretive, defensive. Stopped seeing his friends. Stopped calling me, even though we'd stayed friends after we broke up. Why are you telling me this? Kevin asked. Because 8 months after they got married, Thomas tried to kill himself. The words hit like a punch. Kevin felt his chest tighten, his breathing shallow. He survived, Donna said quickly, but he lost everything. His house, his savings, his business. Jean and her mother had convinced him to put everything in joint accounts, to invest in opportunities that never existed, to take out loans for emergencies that weren't real. By the time he figured out what was happening, they'd cleaned him out completely. Kevin's mind raced, connecting dots he didn't want to see. Where is he now? Living with his brother in Minnesota. Broken. Still can't talk about it without breaking down. Donna pulled out her phone, scrolling quickly. But he's not the only one. She showed Kevin photos, screenshots of newspaper articles, court documents, social media posts. 3 different men. 3 different towns within a 100-mile radius of Merrill Lake. All of them had dated Jean Pierce. All of them had been destroyed. The pattern's the same every time, Donna said, her voice shaking with barely controlled anger. Jean works at the bank, identifies men with stable finances and no close family connections. She pursues them slowly, patiently, makes them feel safe. Then she introduces them to her mother. Together, they work on the target, financial advice, investment opportunities, joint accounts for the wedding they're planning. By the time the man realizes what's happening, they've already taken everything. Kevin felt cold spreading through his body, but his voice remained steady. Why haven't they been arrested? Because they're careful. Everything's technically legal, persuasion, not coercion. The men sign documents willingly, give access voluntarily. By the time it falls apart, there's no clear crime, just bad financial decisions and a divorce. Most of the men are too humiliated to fight back. The ones who try find themselves facing lawyers they can't afford. She pulled up more photos, financial documents, bank statements, messages between Jean and previous victims showing the same careful, patient approach that Kevin had experienced over the past 6 months. They rotate counties, Donna said. Keep the scams separated by distance and time. Someone would have to be actively looking to connect the dots. And most people don't look because Jean and Nadine seem so normal, so warm, so family-oriented. Kevin stared at the evidence, his mind cataloging everything he'd noticed over the past 6 months. The way Jean had never pushed too hard, but always seemed to know exactly when to pull back. How she'd positioned herself as the perfect partner, patient, understanding, never demanding, but always present. The careful way she'd introduced topics of shared finances without making it seem like her idea. And tonight's dinner, Nadine's immediate acceptance. The way she talked about finishing what you start, about being a provider, about families sticking together. They'd been setting the stage. Kevin looked at Donna, seeing the pain and anger that came from watching someone you cared about destroyed. "Why help me?" he asked. "You don't know me." "Because I couldn't help Thomas," Donna said quietly. "I tried to warn him, and he thought I was jealous. By the time he believed me, it was too late. I've been watching for them to do it again. When I saw you here tonight, saw that same look on Jean's face that I remember from Thomas's photos. I couldn't stay quiet." Kevin nodded slowly. His mind was already working, shifting from shock into something else, something colder and more focused. "Thank you," he said, "for the warning. What are you going to do?" Donna asked. "I don't know yet," Kevin admitted, "but I'm not going to be another one of their victims." He pulled out his phone, quickly photographing the documents Donna showed him. She didn't object, just held each one steady for his camera. "Be careful," she said when they finished. "They're good at this. They've been doing it for years." "So have I," Kevin said, though he wasn't sure what he meant by that yet. He slipped out of the storage room, checked that the hallway was empty, and returned to the dining room. Jean and Nadine were laughing together over something, their heads close, that practiced intimacy of people who worked as a team. Kevin slid back into his seat, smiling naturally. "Sorry that took so long," he said. "No problem at all," Nadine said, patting his hand. "We were just talking about how perfect you are for Jean. I was about to come check on you," Jean added, her concern seeming genuine. Kevin kissed her temple, the gesture automatic. "I'm fine. Just thinking." "About what?" Jean asked, a careful note in her voice. Kevin met her eyes, seeing past the warmth to the calculation underneath. "About how lucky I am," he said, "to have found someone like you." Jean's smile was brilliant and absolutely empty. "We're the lucky ones," Nadine said, raising her coffee cup. "To family. Old and new." Kevin touched his cup to theirs, his expression warm, his mind already 3 moves ahead. He didn't confront them. He didn't leave in a dramatic exit. He didn't let a single flicker of what he now knew show on his face. Because Kevin Holloway had learned something important during his divorce. The people who screamed and raged and made scenes rarely won. The people who stayed calm, who documented everything, who built their case quietly and methodically. Those were the ones who walked away with their lives intact. Jean and Nadine had spent 6 months studying him, learning his weaknesses, positioning him for the kill. They had no idea he was now studying them. When dinner ended, Kevin hugged Nadine goodbye, letting her squeeze him with that possessive warmth. He drove Jean home, kissed her goodnight at her door, and told her he'd see her soon. "I love you," Jean said softly, the words feeling like a test. Kevin smiled, gentle and certain. "I love you too." It was the first lie he'd told her directly. It wouldn't be the last. Back at his house, Kevin sat at his kitchen table with his laptop and the photos from Donna. He started a new folder on his hard drive, labeled it with Jean's full name, and began organizing the evidence. 3 men. Same pattern. Same outcome. Kevin had spent his entire adult life being careful, being cautious, protecting himself from exactly this kind of betrayal. Jean and Nadine had chosen the wrong mark this time, because Kevin Holloway didn't run from problems. He solved them. Kevin went to work Monday morning like nothing had changed. He filed shipping reports, negotiated with carriers, handled logistics problems with the same steady efficiency that had earned him a reputation as reliable. His coworkers noticed nothing different about him because there was nothing to notice. That was the important part. Everything needed to look normal while he figured out exactly what he was dealing with. Jean texted him during lunch. "Had such a good time Saturday. Mom can't stop talking about you." Kevin stared at the message, seeing the manipulation beneath the friendly words. She was reminding him of Nadine's approval, reinforcing that he'd passed some crucial test. Keep him feeling good about himself. Keep him moving toward the trap. "She's great," Kevin typed back. "Really glad I got to meet her." He set the phone down and returned to his work, but his mind was elsewhere. He needed more information. Donna had given him the framework, but he needed details. Names, dates, specific financial transactions. Enough to build a case that couldn't be dismissed as coincidence or bad luck. That evening, Kevin drove 40 minutes to a coffee shop in the next county over, somewhere Jean would have no reason to visit. He'd messaged Donna through Facebook, asking to meet again. She'd agreed immediately. She was already there when he arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a laptop open and a manila folder beside her. "I've been collecting this for a year," Donna said without preamble. "Since Thomas fell apart. I thought about going to the police, but I don't have standing. I'm not a victim. I'm just someone who watched it happen." Kevin sat across from her, his attention focused. "Walk me through it. From the beginning." Donna pulled out a timeline she constructed. It was meticulous. Dates when Thomas first met Jean, when they started dating, when financial discussions began, when they got married, when things started falling apart. She documented conversations Thomas had shared with her, texts he'd forwarded, bank statements he'd shown her when he was trying to figure out what was happening. "It starts with small things," Donna explained, pointing to entries from early in Thomas's relationship with Jean. She'd mentioned being worried about interest rates, or a great investment opportunity her mother told her about. Nothing pushy, just planting seeds. Kevin studied the timeline, recognizing the pattern. Jean had been doing the same thing with him. Casual mentions of financial planning, comments about how important it was to be smart with money, suggestions that her mother had really good advice about investments. He dismissed it as normal conversation. Now he saw it as groundwork. "Then comes the engagement," Donna continued. "Jean suggests combining finances because they're going to be married anyway. So why keep things separate? Makes it easier to plan the wedding," she says. Thomas agrees because it seems reasonable. Kevin's stomach tightened. Jean had started making similar noises recently. Nothing direct, but comments about how complicated separate finances could be, how much easier life would be if they just shared everything. "The wedding never happens," Donna said quietly. "Or if it does, it doesn't last long. Once they have access to the accounts, Nadine gets involved directly. Investment opportunities that require immediate action. Loans for business ventures that seem legitimate but aren't. Medical emergencies for distant family members. The requests escalate gradually. By the time the victim realizes something's wrong, their accounts are empty and Jean is filing for divorce." She showed Kevin court documents from 2 of the cases. The divorce filings were nearly identical, irreconcilable differences, no fault on either side, quick and clean. The men had been too devastated to fight, too embarrassed to explain to lawyers what had really happened. Thomas was different, Donna said. He tried to fight back, hired a lawyer, documented what he could. But Jean and Nadine had been careful. Every transaction had his signature. Every transfer had been authorized. It looked like he'd made bad decisions, not that he'd been scammed. The lawyer told him he couldn't win. That would cost more to fight than to just walk away. Kevin absorbed this information with grim focus. He took photos of everything Donna showed him, added them to his growing file. The pattern was undeniable. 3 men in 4 years, each left financially destroyed and emotionally shattered. And Kevin was next in line. "Thank you for this," he said finally, "for trusting me with it. What are you planning?" Donna asked, her eyes sharp. "Because if you're thinking about confronting them, don't. They're too good at talking their way out of things." "I'm not going to confront them," Kevin said calmly. "I'm going to do something else." "What?" Kevin met her gaze, his expression hard. "I'm going to make sure this stops." Over the next week, Kevin became a man divided. On the surface, he was the same careful, loving boyfriend Jean had been dating for 6 months. He texted her good morning. He called to check in after work. He had dinner with her twice, laughing at her jokes, holding her hand across the table, playing the part perfectly. Underneath, he was hunting. He reached out to the other men Donna had identified. 2 didn't respond to his messages, probably assuming it was spam or too broken to want to relive the experience. But the third, a man named Robert Callahan, called him back within hours of Kevin's carefully worded email. "How did you find me?" Robert asked, his voice wary. "Someone warned me about Jean Pierce and her mother," Kevin said. "I'm trying to understand the full scope before they do to me what they did to you." Silence on the other end. Then, "You're dating her now?" "Yes." "Get out," Robert said immediately, urgency sharpening his words. "Whatever you think you know, whatever precautions you think you're taking, get out now. These women are professionals. They'll destroy you." "I'm not leaving," Kevin said calmly. "I'm documenting." "What?" Robert's voice cracked with old pain. "What's the point? I try to fight them legally. My lawyer said there wasn't a case. They're too careful, too smart. You can't beat them." "Maybe I can't beat them the way you tried," Kevin admitted. "But there are other ways." "Like what?" "I don't know yet," Kevin said honestly. "But I need information from you. Everything you remember. Every conversation, every financial transaction, every promise they made and broke. Will you help me?" Robert was quiet for a long moment. Kevin could hear breathing on the other end, ragged and pained. "They took everything from me," Robert finally said. "My savings, my house, my self-respect. I had to declare bankruptcy. My credit's destroyed. I can't get loans. Can't even rent a decent apartment without someone co-signing. My own family thinks I'm an idiot for letting it happen." "I'm sorry," Kevin said, meaning it. "If you can really stop them," Robert said slowly, "if you can actually make them pay for what they've done, I'll give you everything I have. Every text, every email, every bank statement, all of it." "Thank you," Kevin said. "I promise I won't waste what you give me." "You better not," Robert said, a ghost of anger entering his voice. "Because if you screw this up, she'll just move on to the next guy. This doesn't end until someone stops them." "I know," Kevin said. "That's why I'm not running." The information came in over the next few days. Robert sent files, screenshots, recorded conversations he'd kept from before things fell apart. Kevin added them to his growing archive, cross-referencing with what Donna had given him, building a comprehensive timeline. The pattern was consistent across all 3 previous victims. Initial contact through the bank. Slow, patient courtship lasting 4 to 6 months. Introduction to Nadine, an upscale restaurant or family gathering. Talk of marriage within weeks of meeting the mother. Gradual pressure to combine finances, always framed as practical and romantic. Investment opportunities requiring immediate access to funds. Escalating financial crises requiring loans or transfers. Finally, divorce filing once accounts were empty, leaving the victim with debt, and Kevin studied the pattern like a chess match, looking for weaknesses, places where Jean and Nadine had made mistakes or left trails they couldn't erase. He found several promising threads. Text messages where Jean had been less careful about her wording. Bank records showing regular transfers between Jean and Nadine that correlated with money being withdrawn from the victim's accounts. A pattern of Nadine opening and closing business accounts shortly after each victim was cleaned out. It wasn't enough for criminal charges. Donna had been right about that. Everything was technically consensual wrapped in the language of relationships and family trust. But it was enough to establish the pattern. And patterns were what Kevin needed. Jean started pushing harder about their future. It was subtle, skillfully done, but Kevin recognized it now. They were having dinner at his house on a Friday evening, cooking together in his small kitchen with music playing softly in the background. Jean was chopping vegetables while Kevin monitored something on the stove, and the scene felt domestic and comfortable. "I've been thinking," Jean said casually, not looking up from her cutting board. "About us. About what comes next." Kevin stirred the sauce, his expression neutral. "Yeah. We've been together almost 7 months now," Jean continued. "I know that's not super long, but it feels like longer, you know? Like we've known each other forever." "I know what you mean," Kevin said, though his tone was carefully noncommittal. "My lease is up in 2 months," Jean said, still in that casual, offhand voice. "I've been thinking about whether to renew or maybe look at other options." Kevin heard the unspoken question. She was giving him an opening to suggest she move in, or to talk about getting a place together, or to start the conversation that would lead to more entangled finances. He'd seen this exact moment in Robert's timeline. 3 weeks before Robert proposed, Jean had mentioned her lease ending. "What are you thinking?" Kevin asked, buying time. Jean set down her knife and turned to face him, her expression open and vulnerable. "I'm thinking that I love you, and I know it's maybe too soon to talk about marriage, but I can't help imagining what that would look like. Us building a life together, planning for the future, making decisions as a team." She was good. Her voice held exactly the right mix of hope and hesitation, like she was putting herself out there and risking rejection. Kevin set down his spoon and pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "I love you too," he said, the lie coming easier each time. "And I think about the future too." "Yeah." Jean looked up at him, her eyes bright. "Yeah," Kevin confirmed. "But I want to do this right. I want to make sure we're ready, that we've thought through everything." "Of course," Jean said quickly. "I'm not trying to rush anything. I just wanted you to know where my head's at." "I appreciate that," Kevin said. "And I'm thinking about the same things. Let's take our time and figure out together." Jean smiled, satisfied with his response. She'd planted the seed. She'd let it grow while she and Nadine worked the next angle. Kevin kissed her again, his hands gentle on her waist, his mind calculating exactly how to use this against them. That night, after Jean left, Kevin sat at his kitchen table with his laptop and reviewed everything he'd collected. The pattern was clear. The evidence was substantial, but he still needed something more, something that would force consequences without relying on a criminal justice system that couldn't or wouldn't see what Jean and Nadine were doing. He thought about his father's advice, whispered to him during the darkest days of his divorce. The legal system isn't about truth. It's about what you can prove and who is better lawyers. Sometimes you have to find other ways to get justice. Kevin had never understood what his father meant until now. He opened a new document and started writing down every institution and organization Jean and Nadine had connections to. The bank where Jean worked. The professional organizations Nadine belonged to. The tight-knit community of Marrow Lake where reputation mattered more than legal judgments. Kevin understood small towns. He'd lived in this area his whole life. He knew how whispers spread, how patterns became local knowledge, how a damaged reputation could close more doors than any lawsuit. Jean and Nadine had been successful because they'd kept their victims isolated and separate. No one compared notes. No one saw the bigger picture. Kevin was going to change that. He started drafting emails to the other victims, asking if they'd be willing to coordinate. Not a lawsuit. That path was closed. But a collective testimony. A documented pattern that couldn't be dismissed as coincidence. Robert responded first. "I'm in. Whatever you need." By the end of the week, all 3 previous victims had agreed to work with Kevin. They shared information, compared timelines, swapped documentation. The picture became sharper with each new detail. Jean and Nadine had been doing this for at least 5 years, possibly longer. They'd refined their approach with each victim, gotten better at covering their tracks, learned from their mistakes. But they'd never expected someone like Kevin. Someone patient enough to pretend. Someone careful enough to document. someone angry enough to see it through. Kevin maintained his performance perfectly. He met Jean for lunch. He attended a work party at the bank with her, charming her co-workers, fitting seamlessly into her world. He had Sunday dinner with Jean and Nadine, listening to Nadine's investment advice with apparent interest, asking questions that made her think he was hooked. "You know, Kevin," Nadine said over dessert, her tone carefully casual, "Jean mentioned you keep most of your savings in a basic account at the bank. Have you thought about more aggressive growth options?" Here it was, the transition from relationship building to financial positioning. Kevin nodded thoughtfully. "I've thought about it, but I don't know much about investing beyond basic stuff." "That's what I'm here for," Nadine said with a warm smile. "I've helped several people build their portfolios. Conservative but smart strategies. I could introduce you to some opportunities that might interest you." "I'd appreciate that," Kevin said, watching Jean squeeze his hand encouragingly under the table. "Why don't you come by the house next week?" Nadine suggested. "We can sit down properly, look at your financials, talk about goals. No pressure, just information." "That sounds great," Kevin said, meaning every word in a way they couldn't understand. Because he was absolutely going to Nadine's house next week. He was going to bring his documentation. He was going to record the conversation. He was going to let them think they were reeling him in while he gathered exactly what he needed. After dinner, Jean walked him to his truck, her arms around his waist, her head on his shoulder. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For being so open with my mom. I know the money stuff can be awkward, but she really does know what she's talking about. She helped me build my savings after my dad died. I trust her completely." Kevin kissed the top of her head, his expression hidden in the darkness. "I trust you. And if you trust her, that's good enough for me." Jean looked up at him, her eyes suspiciously bright. "I really do love you, Kevin. I know I say it a lot, but I mean it." "I know you do," Kevin said gently, because she did mean it in her own way. Jean loved what Kevin represented. Stability, money, a Mark who'd proven himself perfect. She loved the game they were playing, the slow satisfaction of hooking another victim. What she didn't love was him, the actual person. Kevin understood that now, and it made what he was about to do so much easier. He drove home that night with his jaw tight and his mind clear. Jean and Nadine had spent months positioning him exactly where they wanted him. They had no idea they'd positioned themselves exactly where Kevin needed them. Kevin's meeting with Nadine was scheduled for a Wednesday evening at her house. Jean couldn't attend, a last-minute work obligation she apologized for profusely, which meant Kevin would be alone with Nadine. Perfect. He arrived exactly on time, carrying a leather portfolio that contained real financial documents mixed with carefully selected notes designed to make him look naive but wealthy. He dressed in business casual, playing the part of a man taking this seriously. Nadine's house was a modest ranch in an older neighborhood, well-maintained but not ostentatious. The kind of place that suggested careful financial management, not greed. Another part of the performance. She welcomed him with a hug, ushered him into a living room that smelled like vanilla candles and fresh coffee. Family photos covered the walls. Jean at various ages, Nadine with a man Kevin assumed was Jean's father, generational pictures that suggested deep roots and stability. All of it designed to make victims feel safe. "I'm so glad we're doing this," Nadine said, settling into a chair across from Kevin with her own leather folder. "Jean tells me you're a planner. I appreciate that. Too many people go through life without thinking about their financial future." "My father taught me to be careful," Kevin said, which was true, just not in the way Nadine thought. They talked for 30 minutes about Kevin's current financial situation. He showed her bank statements, real ones, but carefully selected to hide his actual full savings. He mentioned retirement accounts, property value, steady income. Made himself look comfortable but not rich. Enough to be worth their time, not enough to scare them off. Nadine listened with focused attention, taking notes, asking thoughtful questions. She was building a profile of his financial vulnerability, looking for angles they could exploit. "You're doing well," she said eventually. "Better than a lot of people your age. But you're not maximizing your potential." "What do you mean?" Nadine pulled out glossy brochures for investment opportunities. Real estate trusts, small business ventures, cryptocurrency portfolios managed by boutique firms. All of it legitimate sounding enough that someone who didn't look closely might believe it. Kevin had looked closely. He'd researched every company Nadine mentioned. Half didn't exist. The others were shells that funneled money into accounts she controlled. These are opportunities I've used myself, Nadine said. Conservative but high return. The key is getting in early before the market catches up. Kevin studied the brochures, his expression thoughtful. These look interesting. What's the catch? No catch, Nadine said with a gentle laugh. Just smart investing. But I'll be honest, Kevin, the best opportunities require a minimum investment, usually around $25,000 to $30,000 to start. There it was. The first direct ask, not framed as borrowing or helping, but as investing, making money, building their future together. Kevin had seen this exact pitch in Robert's documentation. Almost word for word the same approach. That's a significant amount, Kevin said slowly, playing uncertain. It is, Nadine agreed, which is why I want you to think about it. Talk to Jean. Consider whether this is right for you. I'm not pressuring you, Kevin. I'm just offering information. The disclaimer was important to them. They always made it clear you had a choice, that they weren't forcing anything. Covered their legal bases while applying emotional pressure. Kevin nodded, appearing to consider seriously. I'll think about it. Talk to Jean like you said. Perfect, Nadine said, reaching over to pat his knee. That's all I ask. Just think about your future. About the life you and Jean could build together. Kevin let the meeting run another 20 minutes, discussing timeline and logistics, letting Nadine feel like she was successfully positioning him. When he left, she hugged him again, told him she was so happy Jean had found someone like him. In his truck, Kevin sat for a moment before starting the engine. He pulled out his phone, which had been recording the entire conversation from his jacket pocket, and saved the file with a date stamp. One more piece of evidence for the folder. Over the next week, Kevin coordinated with the other victims. They agreed to meet, all three of them plus Kevin, in a neutral location to compare notes and build a comprehensive case. They met at a chain restaurant halfway between their various towns, sitting in a booth at the back where they wouldn't be overheard. Kevin had never met these men in person before, had only spoken to them on phone calls and through messages. Seeing them in the flesh made the stakes more real. Thomas, Donna's ex, was thin and haunted with the kind of exhaustion that came from fighting a battle you'd already lost. Robert looked better physically, but carried himself with a wariness that suggested permanent damage. The third man, Nathan, barely spoke beyond introductions, just listened with dark circles under his eyes. Thank you for coming, Kevin said. I know this isn't easy. You said you had a plan, Robert replied, his voice flat. I'm here to see if that's true, or if you're just another guy who thinks he can beat them. Fair enough. Kevin laid out everything he'd collected, documentation from all three previous victims, recordings of his conversations with Jean and Nadine, timeline analysis showing the pattern, financial records proving regular transfers between mother and daughter that correlated with money being drained for victims. It's not enough for criminal charges, Kevin said bluntly. I know that. We all know that. They've been too careful. Everything's technically consensual. Every signature is real. Every transfer was authorized, even if it was under false pretenses. So what's the point? Nathan asked quietly. If we can't get them arrested, what are we doing? Kevin looked at each man in turn. We're making sure they can't do this again. Not through the legal system. Through something else. What? Thomas asked, a spark of interest breaking through his exhaustion. Jean works at a bank, Kevin said. Banks have ethics boards, compliance departments. They take accusations of financial impropriety seriously, especially when it involves employee conduct. You think they'll fire her over this? Robert sounded skeptical. Maybe, maybe not, but it'll put her on their radar. Make them watch her transactions more closely. Make it harder for her to identify and pursue future marks. Kevin pulled out another document, a detailed complaint he'd drafted, written in clinical language, documented with timeline and evidence, signed by all three previous victims. And Nadine runs several small business LLCs that she uses to funnel money, Kevin continued. She files taxes on them, claims expenses. If those businesses are front for fraud, That's something the IRS might find interesting. You're going after them with paperwork, Nathan said, understanding dawning in his eyes. I'm going after them with patterns, Kevin corrected. The thing about patterns is that once you see them, you can't unsee them. I'm going to make sure everyone who matters sees what these women do, not as isolated incidents, but as a system, a pattern, a practice. He pulled out copies of the complaint for each man to review. It was thorough, factual, emotionless, just dates and transactions and documented conversations. But together, it painted an undeniable picture. Will this get us our money back? Thomas asked. No, Kevin said honestly. That money's gone. They've been careful about moving it, hiding it, making it disappear into legitimate-looking expenses. But this will stop them from doing it to someone else. That's not justice, Robert said bitterly. No, Kevin agreed. It's not, but it's consequences. And sometimes that's all we can get. The men studied the documents in silence. Kevin waited, letting them process, letting them decide if this was enough. If stopping Jean and Nadine from creating more victims was worth the effort. Thomas signed first, his hand shaking slightly. Then Robert. Finally Nathan, his jaw tight with old anger. What happens next? Thomas asked. I submit this to Jean's bank ethics board, with copies to the regional management and compliance department, Kevin said. I file reports with the IRS about Nadine's business activities, including financial patterns that suggest fraud. I make sure the paper trail is complete and impossible to ignore. And what about you? Robert asked. They're going to know this came from you. Kevin smiled grimly. They already know. I'm just making sure I do this right. The confrontation happened on Kevin's terms, at his house, on a Friday evening 2 weeks after his meeting with Nadine. He'd invited Jean and Nadine to dinner, casual, just the three of them, to celebrate some imaginary work anniversary. Jean had been excited about it, texting him throughout the day about what to bring, what to wear. Nadine had probably seen it as an opportunity to push harder on the investment opportunities, to close the deal while Kevin was feeling secure and happy. They arrived together at 7, Jean carrying a bottle of wine, Nadine bringing flowers for his table. Kevin welcomed them warmly, took their coats, played the perfect host. He'd made lasagna, his father's recipe, something that required patience and care. They ate and talked and laughed, the conversation flowing easily around topics that didn't matter. Kevin was relaxed and charming, asking Nadine about her week, complimenting Jean on a new haircut, being exactly the man they thought they'd captured. After dinner, over coffee and dessert, Kevin excused himself briefly. When he returned, he carried a manila folder. He set it on the table between them with deliberate care. What's this? Jean asked, her smile uncertain. Open it, Kevin said calmly. Jean glanced at her mother, then pulled the folder toward her. Her expression changed as she paged through the contents, going from confusion to recognition to cold anger. Inside was everything. Timeline of her previous relationships. Financial records from Thomas, Robert, and Nathan. Bank statements showing patterns of transfers. Documentation of the investment scams. Transcripts of Kevin's conversations with Nadine. Evidence of the systematic fraud they'd been running for years. And copies of the complaints Kevin had already submitted to the bank's ethics board and the IRS. What did you do? Nadine asked, her voice sharp as glass. Kevin met her stare without flinching. I made sure you stop. Jean's hands trembled as she continued reading, her face going pale. You recorded us? Without permission. Wisconsin's a one-party consent state, Kevin said evenly. I'm allowed to record conversations I'm part of. Every word in those transcripts is legal evidence. This isn't evidence of anything except bad luck, Nadine said, her voice steady despite the fury in her eyes. People have relationship problems. Finances get complicated. None of this proves a crime. You're right, Kevin agreed, which is why I'm not trying to get you arrested. I'm just making sure people know what you do. You think this scares us? Jean said, her voice hardening in a way Kevin had never heard before. All pretense of warmth had evaporated. This was a real Jean, cold, calculating, angry at being caught. No, Kevin said. I know it doesn't scare you. That's why I already sent copies to the bank's internal ethics board. and to two family law attorneys who specialize in financial fraud, and to the local newspaper, with a strongly worded suggestion that they might want to investigate a pattern of men being financially destroyed after dating the same woman. Nadine stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You'd ruin us?" Kevin stood as well, matching her intensity with calm certainty. "You taught me that family sticks together," he said. "So I stuck with the men you destroyed, the family you created through your crimes. And we decided that the pattern ends here." "This won't hold up," Jean said, but her voice carried less certainty now. "It's all circumstantial. Speculation." "Maybe," Kevin allowed, "but your employer doesn't need criminal conviction to fire you. They just need reasonable concern about an employee using their position to identify and exploit vulnerable customers." "And Nadine's LLC accounts? The IRS doesn't need conviction either. Just patterns that suggest tax fraud and money laundering. They'll audit. They'll investigate. Even if they don't file charges, the attention alone will make it impossible for you to operate." Nadine's expression shifted, calculation replacing anger. "What do you want? To buy our silence?" Kevin almost laughed at the audacity. Even now, even caught, she was looking for an angle. "I don't want anything from you," he said. "I want you to live with the consequences of what you've done. I want Jean to lose her job. I want Nadine's accounts frozen during investigation. I want you both to understand what it feels like when someone systematically destroys your life." "You self-righteous," Jean started, her face twisted with rage. "I'm not righteous," Kevin interrupted calmly. "I'm just done with people like you. People who think being smart and careful gives them the right to hurt others. You spent months learning my weaknesses, positioning me for exploitation. You made one mistake." "What mistake?" Nadine asked coldly. "You assumed I'd break like the others," Kevin said. "That when I figured it out, I'd either run away or fall apart. You didn't expect me to stay, to document, to fight back with the same patience you used to hunt me." Jean's hands clenched into fists. "This won't work. We'll fight this. We'll hire lawyers. We'll make you look like a bitter ex-boyfriend who's making up stories." "Go ahead," Kevin said. "Hire lawyers. Let them see the pattern. Let them explain to a courtroom or an ethics board or an IRS investigator why 3 different men in 3 different towns all lost everything after dating you. Let them explain the financial transfers between you and your mother that perfectly correlate with money being drained from those men's accounts." "Those transfers were gifts," Nadine said quickly. "Mother to daughter. Completely legal." "Timing's interesting, though," Kevin said. "Especially when you factor in the dates those transfers were made compared to when your victim's accounts were emptied. Almost like you were sharing the proceeds." Kevin walked to his front door and opened it, the gesture clear. "You should leave now, before I decide to make this truly public, before I go beyond ethics boards and attorneys, before I start posting this on social media and letting your community see exactly what you are." Nadine moved toward the door, her posture rigid with controlled fury. But Jean hesitated, staring at Kevin with something between hatred and disbelief. "I loved you," she said, the words sounding almost genuine. Kevin met her eyes, letting her see his absolute lack of sympathy. "No, you didn't. You loved what I represented. Money, stability, another mark. But you never saw me as a person. None of your victims were people to you, just opportunities." "You're making a mistake," Jean said quietly. "We won't just disappear. We'll come after you. Legally. Financially. Whatever it takes." Kevin smiled without warmth. "Feel free to try. I'm ready. I've documented everything. Backed up everything. Shared everything with people you can't threaten or intimidate. You come after me, and I'll make sure every detail of your operation becomes public record. I'll make sure your names are synonymous with fraud in every town within 100 miles. Your choice." They left without another word, their carefully constructed masks finally shattered. Kevin closed the door behind them and stood in the sudden silence of his house. His hands were steady. His breathing was calm. He felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just the quiet certainty of a job completed. He'd meant every word. He'd submitted the complaints, filed the reports, built the case that would make Jean and Nadine's lives significantly harder, even if it didn't result in criminal charges. And he made sure other men were watching, ready to come forward if Jean and Nadine tried to target someone else. The cycle was broken, not through dramatic confrontation or legal victory, but through patient, methodical consequences. Exactly the way Kevin had learned to handle problems. Jean lost her job within a month. The bank's ethics investigation concluded that while no criminal activity could be proven, her conduct raised sufficient concerns about professional boundaries and potential conflicts of interest to warrant termination. Kevin knew this because Robert called to tell him, his voice carrying the first hint of satisfaction Kevin had heard from him. "They actually fired her," Robert said, sounding almost disbelieving. "I didn't think they would." "Pattern was too clear," Kevin replied. "And banks are sensitive about employees using customer information for personal benefit. Even if they can't prove a crime, they can't risk the liability." "What about the mother?" "Her accounts are frozen pending IRS review. Investigation could take years. Even if they don't find enough to prosecute, the scrutiny makes it impossible for her to run her scams. She'll spend the next few years buried in paperwork and audits." Robert was quiet for a moment. "It's not enough. They should be in prison." "Yeah," Kevin agreed. "They should. But this is what we got. It'll have to be enough." "Think they'll try again somewhere else?" Kevin had thought about that. Extensively. Maybe. But their pattern's broken now. For victims willing to testify if they try again. Documentation that can follow them. They'll have to completely change how they operate, if they can operate at all. "Because of you," Robert said quietly. "You did this." "We did this," Kevin corrected. "You and Thomas and Nathan. You all came forward. Shared documentation. Made the pattern undeniable. I just organized it." "Still," Robert said, "thank you. For not running. For seeing it through." After the call ended, Kevin sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee, watching snow fall outside his window. Merrow Lake looked peaceful in the twilight, lights coming on in houses up and down the street, smoke rising from chimneys, life continuing its normal rhythm. Kevin thought about Jean occasionally, not with longing or regret, but with a clinical sort of interest. He wondered if she'd learned anything from being caught, or if she and Nadine were already planning their next move, their next adaptation. He hoped they'd learned. He doubted they had. Some people were incapable of seeing others as anything but opportunities. That was a choice they made again and again until it became who they were. Kevin had made a different choice. Not to forgive, not to move on, but to make sure the pattern ended. To protect the next potential victim, even if he couldn't undo the damage done to previous ones. That would have to be enough. 3 months later, Jean tried to message him. Kevin saw the notification pop up on his phone while he was having coffee with Donna, who'd become something like a friend through this whole process. "Is that her?" Donna asked, noticing his expression. Kevin glanced at the message preview. "We need to talk," and blocked the number without reading further. "Nothing important," he said. Donna smiled slightly. "Good for you. Refusing to engage is the healthiest option." "I'm done engaging," Kevin agreed. "With her. With that whole situation. It's over. Are you really okay?" Donna asked, her concern genuine. "I mean, you spent months pretending to be in love with someone who was planning to destroy you. That can't be easy to process." Kevin considered the question seriously. Was he okay? He wasn't angry anymore. The sharp edge of betrayal had dulled into something more manageable. He'd lost some capacity to trust easily, but he wasn't sure that was entirely bad. He'd learned to recognize patterns, to look beneath surfaces, to protect himself without becoming cynical. "I'm okay," he said finally. "Not great. Not terrible. Just okay. And that's enough." Donna nodded, understanding. That's more than most of us get after something like this. They finished their coffee, talked about safer topics, work, weather, upcoming holidays. Normal things that normal people discussed, free from the weight of fraud and betrayal. Later, driving home through the quiet streets of Merrow Lake, Kevin thought about the man he'd been 6 months ago. Careful, but open to love. Cautious, but hopeful. Trusting slowly, but trusting eventually. He was still that man, mostly. Jean and Nadine had tried to change him, to break him the way they'd broken others. But Kevin had refused to break. He'd bent, adapted, learned, but he hadn't shattered. That felt like winning, even if it didn't look like victory. He stayed in Merrill Lake, kept his logistics job, dated occasionally, though he moved even more slowly now, watching for patterns, trusting his instincts when something fell off. He made new friends, strengthened old relationships, built a life that didn't require drama or revenge to feel meaningful. He thought about Jean sometimes, usually when he saw couples who seemed happy, who hadn't learned yet how easily trust could be weaponized. He hoped they never learned. He hoped their love was real. And when he thought about what Jean and Nadine had tried to do to him, when he remembered the cold calculation in their eyes when the masks finally dropped, Kevin felt nothing beyond a distant sort of satisfaction. He'd protected himself. He'd protected others. He made sure the cycle ended. Kevin Holloway didn't forgive. He didn't need to. Forgiveness implied that what they'd done was something that could be accepted, understood, moved past. It wasn't. What they'd done was predatory and calculated, designed to destroy men who'd done nothing except believe in love. Kevin didn't forgive that. He simply made sure it stopped. And then he moved forward, building a life defined not by what he'd survived, but by what he chose to become afterward. Steady, careful, unbroken, safe in the knowledge that he'd beaten them by refusing to become another story they told while hunting their next victim, by turning their pattern against them, by proving that not every mark was breakable. Years later, Kevin would hear occasionally about Jean or Nadine, rumors about them moving away, speculation about new relationships, whispers about financial problems. He never sought out this information, but in a town like Merrill Lake, information found you anyway. He never responded to these rumors, never confirmed or denied what had happened. He simply lived his life, quietly and carefully, in a way that kept him safe from the chaos that seemed to follow other people, just like he'd always done.